My deep appreciation of theater history was instilled in me by Tom Empey, a college mentor to me and hundreds of others. While teaching Greek theater terms, he would grab the fabric of his slacks and say, "You see these pants? Euripides Eumenides," making light of content that could be considered rather dry and stuffy while still maintaining respect for the art, which is what I want to do with this podcast. For each episode, I invite a guest from the many paths my theater career has taken me down. I give my guest no idea what we'll be talking about, but they know we're going to find an outrageous story about theater history and perhaps get a better understanding about why we're still doing it after all these years. So welcome to Euripides Eumenides, and I am your host, Aaron Odom.
Apocalypse, apocalypse, I said, why you wanna show up now? Just when the heart of my life was getting good. I'll give you one more chance. Walk on out of the door, yeah. Get your ass to getting where the getting is good.
Good morrow, Eumenidites. This is Aaron Odom from Trident Theater, bringing you another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. My friends, we're coming up on something quite momentous. Right now, we're on episode 89, which means that the next one is obviously 90, which also means that I am nearing 100 regular full-length episodes of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. Now, I know I have more than 100 episodes right now with my theater horror stories. I really need to get back into those. But whenever a podcast I admire is reaching a milestone like that, I always wonder what they're going to present as the topic for those episodes. Which leads me to wonder, what am I going to do? Well, since this comes out every 2 weeks, I guess I've got about at least 20 more weeks to come up with some ideas. A few are popping into my head as I think of it right away, but perhaps you, my listeners, have some ideas. I'd love to hear from you if you do. Please feel free to write to me at trident@tridenttheater.com, drop me an email, or you can use the contact us form at tridenttheater.com. A lot of people have used that already. Thank you very much. Or you can just drop a DM on the Instagram feeds for Euripides, Eumenides, or Trident Theater. I'd just love to hear what you think I should bring up that I haven't yet so far. Okay, let's get to this episode. As a guest, I've invited a good friend who's always been an enjoyable person to chat theater and the creative arts with. Doug Reitinger has taught English at the college level for decades, but has also written many works, including plays. Doug has also taught theater and literature courses over the years, so he is deeply knowledgeable about all things theater. And I've been wanting to get him on the program for a while, and I'm very glad I did. The conversation we have on this episode is just chef's kiss. Mwah. But why should I keep hyping it up? Let's just get to it. Without further ado, I present to you episode 89, Ivor Novello in Prison. So another year has come to a close. Doug, you've been teaching almost 40 years now. Whew! That's some stamina, man.
Hanging in there.
And the primary focus of your teaching career has been like creative writing and composition. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah.
Some creative stuff, and I taught some theater classes and literature classes throughout the years. Also,
I love those. I love those ones. Obviously, I'm doing a theater history podcast.
You bet.
But you were just telling me that, and I don't think this is such a huge issue in the theater world yet, but I'm sure it's going to rear its ugly head somehow. In your position, you actually have to review a lot of disciplinary actions revolving around AI-generated works in college.
Yes, it seems to me the real problem is that students don't realize there is a fine line between help that you can get with a reference tool and then where it goes into the point where it's no longer your work anymore.
Yeah. And
I do think it's going to enter into the creative world and, in some really negative ways. And because you can do anything with it. And it's really pretty scary. To me, it is anyway.
Yeah, I toyed around with it. I got like a free trial of them. What was it? Microsoft Copilot. And I'm like, I wonder if it would come up with a neat image for the banner, the image for this podcast, like what can we do? So I'd put in things like Shakespeare in a 1930s stage doing vaudeville or something like that. And it came up with some pretty interesting imagery, but then it would just have words that weren't words. Like it would be some letters weren't completely full letters. It looked like Star Wars language. And here's actually one that I found out that's kind of funny. AI can't seem to understand hands
Really?
when they're generating imagery. So you might see somebody like with their hands crossed and their fingers crossed and is just sitting on their lap, and then they have like 6 extra fingers or knuckles are blending into one another.
I have heard hands and feet are very hard to draw. I've heard that
Right.
to be really good at hands and feet is that you got to be a good artist. One of my favorite artists is Egon Schiele. His hands, they're everybody's got man hands. They all have man hands, so it's great.
This beautiful, elegant woman with rough, calloused,
giant knuckles.
Oh man, that's hilarious. Well, kudos to you for surviving another year, and I'm so glad to have you on the show. We used to sit and just chat for hours about things going on in the theater world and stuff like that. And I found this topic, and I thought you would love this. I just thought you would love this because it's one of those little nuggets of history that we go, really, that actually happened. And yeah, it did. But I guess, I brought you here for a reason, so let's go ahead and get started. Doug, I did send you a question to mull over as we get into this topic here. And the question is this: what is the silliest thing you've ever gotten in trouble for?
This is a difficult question, Aaron, because you can read it in a couple different ways. Because the way I interpreted it the first go around is that a silly sort of like arbitrary punishment or something like that. And I came to the realization that for everything I've ever done wrong, I've deserved everything I got. The punishment was deserved. So I copped to that. But then I realized also the question is asking, what silly thing I have done. And one of the things that my dad had a 1969 Ford Econoline.
Oh yeah, the big van.
And we used to jam it full of teenagers and go partying.
Oh,
or sometimes just one or two people go parking someplace off on some lane somewhere.
Right.
And so one time I was with someone. We were at night, and I pulled into this I thought it was a deserted lot, and a couple hours later, I decided it was time to leave, or we decided it was time to leave, and I pulled forward and I ran over a well casing.
Oh no!
That they how they stick up out of the ground about 8 inches up out of the ground, and they're iron, and then they weld a cap on them. I ran over the top of it, and I hear, we kind of go up in the air, and I hear this whoosh sound, and then we go back down, and then because I'm an idiot and a teenager, instead of going backwards, I go forwards, and it does it again.
Oh yeah, of course.
What happened was I'd run over that well casing with my front right and rear right tires, and the rim on the rim on the wheel, I put a V in it. Popped the tires. And luckily I was only a mile from my house. I had to go to the house and ask my dad not only to drive my date home, but to rescue me with 2 flat tires and 2 ruined rims. So,
okay.
And the punishment was just.
You earned every ounce of it. Got it.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I actually thought, how would I answer this question? I had a couple. I would be what D&D players would call lawful good.
Okay.
So I even at parties in college, 18, 19, there's beer cans everywhere and everybody's having a good time. I'm the one sitting over in the corner going, oh my God, we're going to get caught. And yeah, so I didn't do too much, but I do remember at about age 15, I was at a speech and debate tournament in some school. And in those tournaments, there can be a lot of downtime in between times where you're supposed to be competing and not competing. That not competing, you really have to fill the time. And I don't know how we got into this conversation, but a friend of mine and I started talking about groups of workers that probably deserve a union because they are just not respected, and the line of work is dangerous. And the group of workers we came up with doesn't even have like an official title, but we said we started some sort of like a soapbox demonstration of power to the pontoon boat drivers. We started getting people around us like really excited. I mean, it was very improvisational, like Malcolm X type speeches. It was just ridiculous. And we got an entire cafeteria of kids to start shouting power to the pontoon boat drivers and stomping their feet and slamming on tables. And whoever was in charge just came over to me. I'm standing on a table. I've got my arms in the air. And they just said, get the hell down. Just come here. Power to the pontoon boat drivers. Yep.
It's amazing what you do as teenagers.
I know. And I hope they get their representation someday still.
Yeah.
Anyway, in any case, I'd like to discuss a similar event in theater history. So I'm going to ask you a second question. It's just kind of a, yes or no thing, but how familiar are you with British theater artist Ivor Novello?
I have not heard of, is it Ivor?
Ivor, Ivor.
Wow. Not even Ivor.
Uh-huh.
Not familiar at all.
See, and that's funny. Like, I credit you as one of the smartest people I know, and your knowledge of people, places, and things is just vast. This guy was huge in the UK up to a point. And he did have, you could go to the Internet Broadway database and you can see the list of things that he's put on there, but it's just, we don't know him anymore. One article I read basically said that he was the most important British figure in composition of stage musicals until Andrew Lloyd Webber came along.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's big. But in interest of time, I'm not going to give a full bio for Novello. I'll give something of a rundown, like the stats on the back of a baseball card, because the incident we're going to be discussing is really just a blip on the radar of this man's career, even though every article I looked up on Ivor Novello had at least one little line about the incident. Okay, here we go. David Ivor Davies was born in Cardiff, Wales in 1893 to David Davies, a rates collector, which I think is a now defunct position in the UK government. Like, every time I hear that in the Bible, I'm like, that must have been a terrible job to be a tax collector.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they didn't have the IRS, but, the power of the IRS behind them.
You just have your window open. You're like, oh, shit, Ephraim is coming. And his mother was Clara Novello Davies, a music teacher. And apparently Clara was known all over the world as a music teacher. But the impressions I got about young David's life was that the family lived comfortably in the middle class, maybe upper middle class, even though young David did receive private education in his early years. Now, the family was very musically motivated, and young David began singing in local shows and festivals. And from these public appearances, he earned a scholarship to Magdalen College in Oxford to study music at age 10. It had become quite evident later on just how much of an impact this frequent exposure to music during these formative years was to his life and his career. He sang quite frequently in the choir as a solo treble until the age of 16, when his voice broke in puberty, and from then on, he rarely sang again.
That's a bummer.
It's a bummer. Now you're a tenor. I don't want it. I don't want it anymore. However, his career as a composer began around this time. While some of his early music mentors suggested that he may never have a career in music, young David published his first song at the age of 15.
That's pretty impressive.
Prodigy.
Yep.
In 1913, after leaving school at the age of 16, young David moved to a flat above the Strand Theatre in London with his mother, and he would keep a home there for the rest of his life. She continued to teach music, and her studio attracted what were then huge names in the world of music, and young David gathered all he could from their presence. So he's doing the networking step that a lot of young artists don't always get the chance to do. But for David, it's working really, really well. One such mentor he acquired was Sir Edward Marsh, who loved the arts, but also just happened to be Winston Churchill's personal secretary.
Highly connected.
It's who you know. It was sometime during his early years in London and his growing presence in the world of music that he took his stage name, Ivor Novello, using his given middle name as his first name and his mother's middle name as his surname. I don't know. I like that, though. You know, you're keeping it in the family. You're not just saying, well, no, now I'm Peter. Why Peter? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So his mother was Italian?
No, actually. It turns out that Clara was actually Welsh, but her father had once heard an amazing soprano also named Clara Novello, and he named his daughter after the soprano. So, okay, fine.
Wow.
I mean, I have heard of Stranger Things, but, whatever. You do you. Now, when first in London, Novello taught piano lessons initially, but musical composition kept him financially and artistically motivated. In 1914, he wrote and published the song Keep the Home Fires Burning, a very heartening song for those feeling the pressures of World War I. And it started getting played everywhere. Records are being pressed. Everybody's hearing his music. He was like 18.
Yeah, that was a huge. I mean, from my history, I remember it was a huge song.
Yeah. And I think he did eventually put it into a musical later, but I think it was in the 40s when he finally did that. Anyway, Novello was able to evade military enlistment during World War I for a few years, but in January 1916, the Military Service Act was passed by Parliament, effectively requiring military service from Britain's young men, even married ones. Before that, Britain had a volunteer military. So, beginning in May 1916, Novello had a brief military career. And here's a clipping from an article about his time in the military. He joined the Royal Naval Air Force, but failed as a pilot. He crashed 2 airplanes and was transferred to the Air Ministry. During this time, he composed his first theater score for the show Theodore and Company. He was sent on a highly successful mission to Sweden in 1918 as an entertainer to nullify the effects of German propaganda in that country.
That's a job in the military. That's
Yes, Doug, I got recruited at age 18 by an Army recruiter. And at that point, I'm like, I know I'm going to go into theater. I want to be an actor. I'll at least entertain your call. And the guy told me, he's like, oh, yeah, we got stuff for theater people. I mean, really? Okay. Tell me what you got. And so he told me about, a USO tour that they go around and entertain the troops and everything. And they need all kinds of people. And I said, okay, so how long out of the year would I be doing that? He's like, 2 weeks. Like, what am I doing the other 50? Well, you're serving your country. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sure you can find somebody. Oh, but I think that's so cool. Like his Novello went and toured around and just made people feel happy because all they're hearing is all this negative propaganda machine,
That's a great gig.
I know.
Better than being in a trench somewhere.
Oh my God. Yeah. By the time he left the military in 1919 at age 26, apparently he'd expressed some interest in acting, and his photos started circulating all over the entertainment world. Now, we're still in the silent film era at this time, and an actor's looks were often his most important feature. Novello was often referred to as the handsomest British film actor. And here, I'll send you a picture right now just to prove it. I got a couple of them. Here we go. So there's young Ivor.
Oh yeah, he is a handsome devil.
Yeah. And the one, the movie poster, I mean, his look is so great for that handsome nobleman in olden times, and he can press the damsel in distress to his chest and comfort her, and oh yeah. So yeah, good looking guy ish. I looked at it, I'm like, he's kind of like an Adrian Brody in a way, little into even James Dean territory, kind of.
Yeah, I'm trying to. He reminds me a little bit of a young Warren Beatty, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, I see that, absolutely.
But it's like Warren Beatty meets Gene Wilder. You know, he's not quite, I mean, he's good looking, but it's not quite there.
Well,
I don't,
which says a lot for the phrase the handsomest British film actor.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So he was selected for the lead in the film The Call of the Blood. And while the film was not a great success, it got his face and natural ability for acting, or at least camera acting, in the public spotlight. For a short time, he moved to Los Angeles as he got a 7-picture deal offer from D.W. Griffith. And their first film together, The White Rose, I think that's the poster I sent you, was really pretty successful. And in a time when stars like Rudolph Valentino were selling tickets just on their looks alone, Novello was just the kind of actor that rabid fans could go gaga over. You know, they just wanted to see that face on the poster and see it on screen and didn't care if the movie was any good or not. They just go. Even though Griffith cut Novello's contract short due to his retirement, this didn't stop Novello's star from rising. For the next several years and into the 1930s, Novello starred in a bevy of films in both Britain and LA. For example, he starred in 2 for Alfred Hitchcock, The Lodger and Downhill.
Did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I have a copy of The Lodger. I actually watched that and researched for something. And I didn't remember sitting there thinking, my God, that man's so handsome. But
Yeah.
but I remember liking the movie. Now, this experience in screen acting got Novello even more excited for stage acting, as well as writing songs for musicals or just the complete score for musicals. Now, my longtime listeners might remember Novello's name from episode 36, Colossal Flops Part 1, in which my guest on that episode and I discussed Novello's appearance in the Noel Coward bomb, Sirocco. Did you know about that one?
I do not. I do not.
Oh, okay. Well, this is where I'm going to peel a big layer off of this onion. Ivor Novello was very openly gay. As I've said on this program before many times, up until 1967, it was illegal in Britain for men to be in a homosexual relationship publicly. But while he never declared it publicly and would deny it in print, everyone in the entertainment world knew that Novello was gay. I mean, it was a fact. From 1917 until 1951, when he died, Novello was with his partner Bobby Andrews, even though Novello is known for having periods of promiscuity during his early acting years. So, I mean, he was monogamous to a point, but it was with a man. In any case, we'll talk about Sirocco here. Novello, like Noel Coward, was, I guess you can call them fairly stereotypical gay men, in that they were quite flamboyant with their words and gestures, often using campy humor and attitudes, and everyone loved them all the more for it. So when Coward wrote Sirocco in 1927 about the exploits of a lusty Latin Lothario, he wanted Novello to play the lead. And as my listeners may remember, Novello refused several times due to just who he was, and he knew people knew of his personality. He just didn't fit. It's kind of like trying to force like Paul Rubens into roles that Antonio Banderas would play. You know, it's just that it's not who he is. He only took the part because Noel Coward threatened to play the part himself. So instead of Paul Rubens, it's now RuPaul playing the role.
Yeah.
And begrudgingly, Novello played the role knowing the play would be a disaster, and he was absolutely right. But it was Noel Coward who was embarrassed more than Novello. Like, he made such a big deal out of writing this play, and it tanked. And if you go back and listen to the episode, the poor woman who played the lead just stood on stage crying because it was like her premiere, you know? She was gonna go out there and be this big thing, and everybody was there just shitting on Noel Coward. Poor thing. But even outside of his acting roles, Novello began a trend of writing stage musicals in which he would write himself in as the main character, give himself no songs to sing, and the audience ate them up with a spoon. Like, I've directed myself one time. It was a few years ago. We did that complete works of William Shakespeare, abridged, revised, and I just went, I fit one of these parts. And it was written as though you're playing yourself as the character. So I didn't have to stretch too much to play myself. But I don't know, Doug, what are your thoughts on those people who write themselves into everything? Like, I'm Clint Eastwood and I'm right for every part.
Well, it becomes really hard to separate there's that separation between the actor and the character.
Right.
And it becomes really hard to make that separation anymore, because it's like, and in the mind of the audience also, there are a lot of actors that when I see them on screen, I just like, I'm not believing, I'm not buying into it, because all I do is see them.
Right.
And I think it's just one of those sort of familiarity breeds contempt sort of thing. It's like, because there's only so much you can do, and it's just you again and again. Like you say, your example of Clint Eastwood, that's a good one, because it's like there's no one else. It's just,
Right.
And so he appears on screen and you go, that's Clint. It's not, you don't think of him as a character anymore.
No, I can't. There it was. I was just thought of his character's name in Unforgiven. Will Money. Nope. He's Clint Eastwood.
Yep. That's right. Right.
But I mean, there are those actors that are so dynamic in their personalities that every time you see them, you're like, oh, good. I'm loving this. Like,
yes.
I keep forgetting that Jack Nicholson was eventually the foil in A Few Good Men.
Mm-hmm.
He was so great and villainous in that part. And, on the other hand, you're like, he's kind of the gruff general guy, but, I could have a beer with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, these musicals he wrote, Doug, I can't even tell you how many of these he wrote. He wrote so many. It's ridiculous. Now, there may be some reason that his works were so prolific, and we rarely hear them anymore. And I would suggest that has to do with the evolution of the stage musical in the golden age of musicals. I mean, he was writing before then. While they were still immensely popular before, the golden age of musicals, it was like the 40s and 50s. It was that golden age of musicals when they started to really take form. Like, there's a beginning, middle, and end. We're telling a story. We're using musical devices from the past to help tell this story and carry it along. I mean, this is when you get things like Oklahoma, Annie, Get Your Gun, Brigadoon, Kiss Me Kate, all those. But the ones before that, the stories weren't always intact. The songs didn't always help move the story along, etc. But the songs still remained incredibly popular.
Yeah.
It just was in the middle of a piece. They just sing a jazz tune. Had nothing to do with anything, but everybody loved the jazz tune.
Yeah. It's just so typical of that time period.
Right. Well, and also there was this thing about musicals not being highbrow enough. Like I talked about that a couple episodes ago on Theater Audience Etiquette, when you have this group of people who are just trying to force out negative feelings from the crowd. They don't want those sort of people here. And I think it was opera and ballet that they said, no, these are legitimate art forms. Your musical is just marshmallow fluff.
I can imagine also that the connection with vaudeville was really felt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially with musical comedies, anything that was comedic, people probably immediately went to that association.
Oh yeah, this is the blue collar comedy tour.
Yeah.
You're in a musical. Okay.
Oh God.
Well, here's a cutting from an article I read on the effect that Novello's music had when played for a modern audience. This is actually really interesting. Quote, "They were genuinely moved, rather tearful, in fact. The music produces a real catch in the throat of the sort that only the greatest composers of so-called light music can achieve. It was this quality, rather than the sumptuous settings, flamboyant costumes, and escapism, that brought Novello such adulation. Mostly, it has to be conceded, from the women in his audience." That handsome face. Now, the article continued, though, suggesting the difficulty of reviving Novello's works today. Here we go. "His form of theater has disappeared without a trace, and it is all but impossible to contemplate reviving any of his shows. Apart from anything else, they make very considerable musical demands for which it might be hard to find the performers. The music is the heart of them, and it richly deserves to be heard." So I got asked several years ago, Doug, we're both in Sheridan, Wyoming. Why have we not done Rent in Sheridan yet? And my first response was, you do see the color of the skin of most people around you here, right?
Yeah.
But a more accurate answer is, I don't know if we have the singers. That music requires people to almost be singers before they're actors.
Absolutely.
Same goes for something like Sweeney Todd, where it's like it's all light comic opera, and you have to have people who can sing that.
Yeah, it requires us a lot of training as a singer, I think, and that would be casting, an entire cast. That would be very difficult.
Right. Right. And if the songs are the key of the piece, which I would imagine is pretty characteristic for a lot of the musicals at that time, then it is like I was just suggesting, they have to be singers first before they're actors and storytellers. So I can see how difficult that would be. Plus, if the songs don't carry the story along, that's a problem. I have to say, that topic has always fascinated me, just how a theater group chooses the shows it's going to present for a season. As I'm currently the president of a community theater group, this comes strongly into mind when theater makers have passion projects in mind, regardless if they actually have the resources to pull it off. But I suppose that's one of the great things about theater, the sky's the limit. And I would really challenge you, once you're done listening to this episode, go find some works of Ivor Novello. They are truly gorgeous and seem to capture the intention of an era to blend several elements of lyrical, musical, and vocal perfection and synthesize them into some sort of romantic music idealized. Okay, I'm getting a little too poetic. Let's get back to Doug Reitinger and find out what happened to Ivor Novello in prison. So by the time of World War II, I don't think it's out of order to suggest that Ivor Novello was very similar in work ethic, body of work, but more importantly, celebrity, to someone like Elton John. Like, we can think of him kind of as like the Elton John of the time. He was just that big. Everybody knew him. Everybody knew his work. You say, tell me an Ivor Novello song, they could think of 2 or 3. And also, he's their gay artist that they know. Now, in 1928, Novello's film success had allowed him to buy a little getaway in Maidenhead, which he named Red Roofs. Red Roofs became known as quite the party establishment where some of Novello's naughtiest behaviors were carried out. Out in the country. Hey, there's your Dad's Econoline. Today, the drive would take just under an hour one way from his home above the Strand Theatre in London. Novello retained this property through World War II when the country was going through serious supply chain issues due to the ongoing war. Most essential commodities were being rationed, including gasoline, or as it's known in Britain, petrol. This was one of the very first commodities to be restricted, starting in 1939 and actually lasting all the way through to 1950. So even after the war, people had petrol coupons. And then I read it was a merger of American oil companies that got them out of it. America. During this time, motorists could get full ration books of coupons, and usually one coupon was equal to a gallon of petrol. Initially, motorists were restricted to a certain number of miles that could be driven each month, but as the war went on, the restrictions intensified, and by 1944, virtually any unnecessary travel could not be rewarded with petrol coupons. You were just expected to take public transit wherever you needed to go. Of course, to Novello, who loved to drive his Rolls-Royce to and from Red Roofs as often as he pleased, this became rather distressing when he could no longer get petrol coupons for his journeys. He was told he'd need to take the train, like everyone else. During a performance in London one evening, he had his dressing room full of admirers and lamented about his current crisis of not being able to drive his Rolls-Royce to Red Roofs whenever he wanted to. No, wait a minute. Before we got on this show, you were saying something great about, I can see why the bourgeoisie for a time was the only class that created art.
Yeah, because they have the time. They have it's hard to create art when you're pouring concrete. And I think and when you're sort of those what are the hierarchy of needs, if those higher if you're if you've got to fulfill those needs in basic ways, how did that doesn't lend itself to a lot of, and you need time. So that was my that was my idea with that.
And so when you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from because it is just simply provided for you and somebody will bring it to you, you can make really terrible paintings and poetry. So anyway, he's in his dressing room. He's complaining about not being able to go to Red Roofs in his Rolls Royce, which just ate gas. He claimed that his trips to Red Roofs on the weekends were of national importance, as he was spreading his celebrity, improving morale in wartime. And this was only amplified by the fact that he was driving a British luxury car to do so. But alas.
This sounds an awful lot like Clarence Thomas's Vacations.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I approve every single one of those, as, he provides so much sage, judicial understanding by not saying a damn thing ever.
Exactly. Totally.
Oh, God. Now, one of the admirers in the dressing room was a young woman named Grace Walton. She worked for a firm called Electrical and General Trusts Limited. Her firm was able to acquire petrol coupons for their business. She suggested to Novello that she could have her firm transfer the Rolls-Royce to their location in Reading, which was near Red Roofs, and he could just dip in and out when he pleased. Problem solved.
That's awesome.
I know. Now, this solution obviously pleased Novello. He wouldn't even have to apply for the petrol coupons anymore. Of course, this was never going to work. The plot was discovered as Electrical and General Trust Limited started to notice some errors in calculations, all resulting from Grace Walton's work. But they didn't know her as Grace Walton. To her employers, she was known as Dora Constable.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
Yeah, it just didn't sound like she was a very good criminal.
No.
In any case, the jig was up. Walton was arrested, but also confessed to the plot with Novello. An officer was sent to Novello's London flat to serve him summons, as he was being charged with conspiring misuse of petrol coupons. Novello didn't do so hot in court. Firstly, since he had been fairly wealthy and world famous since his early 20s, he was scared to death about having to worry about the concerns of common people, such as due process of the law.
Wow.
So in court, he was often pretty dramatic, perhaps thinking that he would sway the trial in his favor if he could sway the hearts of the people involved. His theatrics actually had the opposite effect. He really annoyed everyone involved with the proceeding. He also frequently lamented that all of this time in court and away from the theater was causing him serious trauma, as well as the patrons who came to see his shows. And if he couldn't be there,
oh, this is definitely a matter of national security or something.
If I'm not on stage, the morale of the people is just going to tank, and we might as well just invite the Nazis in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the terrorists win, right? It's
the terrorists win. The terrorists win as soon as you stop believing. You stop wearing that flag pin.
Yep.
Whew, yeah. Next, he tried to blame everything on Grace Walton. But frankly, he had agreed to the plot, so he really couldn't deny that.
This is like Scalia and his wife. I'm sorry for the Supreme Court justice references, but it's like Scalia. It's like she did it. It wasn't me.
I had no idea. I had no idea. Our wives decorate our lawns. Nothing. Yeah. Also, it didn't help that the officer who served Novello with his summons testified that Novello had tried to bribe him when he was presented with the summons. This is starting to sound like that theory about Michael Jackson that he never got a childhood.
Oh.
It's like he's been a celebrity for so long, he forgot he was a person.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing that worked against Novello in the proceedings was the trial magistrate, who had been known to hate both theater and homosexuals. This gave him an opportunity to send a message to both communities. Doug has his head in his hands. He's shaking his head.
Got to be the worst nightmares, like, this kind of axe to grind sort of person.
Right. And here comes Ivor Novello just going, oh, what was me? And he's like, oh, this is going to be a good day.
Yeah, they're going to like you in jail.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God.
Both Novello and Walton were convicted of misuse of petrol coupons. Grace Walton was sentenced a fine of 50 pounds. At 1944, I looked it up. That's like 1850 pounds today, which is about 2,300 American dollars now. So that's no joke.
Yeah.
However, the trial magistrate glared at Novello and had this to say when sentencing him. Quote, The normal sentence for this offense would be a fine, but that would be little punishment for a man in your position. I hereby sentence you to 2 months in prison. What were we saying about that axe to grind?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when you hear about that, like when somebody's on trial, and I don't want to talk about the trial that everybody's talking about right now, but you know, when they say the maximum punishment for this is several years in prison, you're like, what, for a parking ticket? You know, but yeah, I guess it could be. Depends on the gravity of the offense and the decision of the judge. So this is what the judge decided. Novello immediately launched an appeal. He was given right to do so. He reached out to his friend, Sir Edward Marsh, to see if any appeal could be made to Winston Churchill. And while Churchill was quite upset because he liked Novello, they knew each other, and he'd go to see Novello, he was quite upset by the sentencing. Churchill ultimately concluded he couldn't overturn a ruling of the judicial system and suggested that Novello just put his best effort into his appeal. At the appeal, Novello was still found guilty, but the prison term was reduced from 2 months to 1.
30 days.
Oh, no. Obviously, Novello was terrified. It said that even with the reduced sentence, and when his appeal failed, Novello apparently made a grand gesture of despair to his admirers in the courtroom. Okay, we're taking it from 2 months to 1. And, you know, cripple and fall into your chair or whatever. That's sort of the era still in which women are beginning to faint when they see a singer on stage or something like that, right?
Yeah.
You know, you hear Frank Sinatra's voice and a woman just, she's gone. At least I think that's what Looney Tunes would have us believe.
Yeah.
Novello was taken to Wormwood Scrubs prison in London in early summer. He was terrified by the idea of mixing with the inmates, almost to the point of a nervous breakdown. But when he went to have lunch on his first full day behind bars, it said that he was greeted in a hallway by a group of inmates singing his song, "We'll Gather Lilacs."
Oh, God.
Oh, I can't even imagine the relief.
You know, it could be there should be a musical. There really should be a musical.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of sort of like the trial of Oscar Wilde, but, this trial, because I think it'd be just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Especially this scene in particular.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the inmates singing. Oh, God.
And I don't know what British inmates looked like in 1944. All I'm picturing is, The Wire and, a bunch of dudes with like do-rags and bandanas and tattoos all over. And they're just lining the hallway. And as soon as he comes in, they're like, oh. Well, evidently, he was immediately charmed, and it appeared that his fandom even penetrated prison walls. Novello soon found himself quite useful in prison. He took over and conducted the prison choir. Apparently, these guys in the hallway were just a small sampling. He was also asked to consult on the creation of a theater inside the prison as part of a nationwide attempt to accelerate the rehabilitation of prisoners. I mean, I heard about that. God, I should do an episode on that. I can't remember. I think it might have been Folsom Prison.
Yeah.
Where inmates did an entire Shakespeare play. And I mean, it had amazing positive impacts on them. I can't remember the scale of it, but it was something like a lot of them got reduced sentences and went out, and those that are still in are continuing to do it and everything. So it's like really giving them a reason to keep going, which I think is awesome. Anyway, after his 4 weeks were up, Novello was released at midnight in an effort to avoid the press. As he met the car that picked him up, it is said that he quoted, "Good heavens, it's like Marie Antoinette and the Flight to Varennes."
He's probably right.
Yeah. I mean, let him eat cake. Novello donated a piano to the chapel in the prison after he was released, and it's still there to this day. He returned to the stage on June 20th, 1944. But a lot of the vim and vigor of Novello seemed to be taken away. It would seem that the conspiracy, his reaction to the public relations nightmare surrounding the incident, and the eventual prison term did actually have an effect on his mental and physical health. But he kept working, writing, and acting all up to his death from a heart attack in 1951. And here are some of the legacies that Novello left behind. The Strand Theater, where his apartment was on the above it, is now known as the Novello Theater. Each year, the Ivor Novello Awards are given out to British musicians and sometimes international musicians for excellence in songwriting. They are known as the Ivors, and they are awarded by the Ivors Academy. A blue plaque was installed at his birthplace in Cardiff, as was a statue. A blue plaque was installed at Red Roofs, which was sold and converted into a theater training school following Novello's death, and you can still take classes there today. And the Ivor Novello Appreciation Bureau manages events all over Britain each year, and they usually culminate in a massive gathering at Red Roofs. Oh, and a scholarship in Novello's name is awarded annually at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. But, Doug, you were saying it would be great if there was a musical about this. In 2023, a theater group known as Homo Promos had written an original 50-minute opera based partly on Novello's time in Wormwood Scrubs. The title of the piece was 1944 Home Fires, and the troupe had gotten permission to present the work as part of a national tour at Wormwood Scrubs in the chapel where Novello led the church choir. They even had secured a piano tuner and permission to use the piano that Novello had donated when he was released. The performance would be given for free.
That's just great.
Yeah. And I guess there was some famous gangster who was supposed to be in the prison at the same time, and I guess he and Novello met. So part of this opera then is about them realizing that they had more in common than they originally realized. But 4 days before the performance at Wormwood Scrubs, the theater company was informed by the prison board that the performance would be canceled and would not be rescheduled. At the time, no reason was given. While the company did complete the tour, Homo Promos was contracted with artists to perform at the prison, even though the performance didn't happen. Homo Promos still needed to compensate their artists and cover production costs. It's estimated that this cancellation cost Homo Promos £2,500, which is nearly 3,200 American dollars. For the one performance. God. Producer Peter Scott Preslin took to Instagram immediately and said the following. We are devastated. This would be the high point of the tour and an homage to a great gay icon. To cancel at 4 days' notice without any reason given is unbelievably unprofessional and a great step back in the progress of the prison service has been making towards equality and diversity. We can only apologize to all those staff and inmates looking forward to the show, many of whom were LGBT+ and looked to this to give some affirmation. They were a little more vehement on their Facebook page. Here's what they said there. To cancel at 4 days' notice is unbelievably unprofessional and potentially financially crippling. There is no other explanation for this than homophobia. It would never have happened to a company called, for example, Straight Acting. Right. Sometime later, the prison service released their own statement. Quote, the prison service is proud to be an inclusive employer, but facilitating this event would not, at the moment, have been the best use of officers' time at Wormwood Scrubs. End quote. No reason given, nothing.
That sounds like an easy excuse.
Yeah. They had better stuff to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that, though, when you're doing an event for prisoners. I spoke about it a couple episodes ago when I arranged a production of a show I did at a high school for the student body. And, it's in the middle of the day when they're expecting to go into class and everything, and they're not. So they're all being idiots out in the house because they're all like, hey, we're getting out of school. Yeah. So I see the potential for some sort of an uprising. But my God, it was somebody who actually had an impact on the prison and the prisoners and has left something of a legacy piece there. And they're like, no, I don't know. I don't get it. Ivor Novello was cremated upon his death in 1951, and his remains are buried beneath a lilac bush at the Golders Green Crematorium. The lilac bush remains there to this day. And Doug, that's my story on Ivor Novello in prison.
I want to see that opera.
50 minutes? You know what? I'm going to look it up. I want to see if it's on YouTube somewhere. That would be amazing. If it is, I'm going to put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, because 50 minutes, that's just like, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's an episode of an HBO show.
Mm-hmm.
1944 home fires. Nope. Oh, wait. Yes, there it is. I
Oh
found
my
one.
gosh.
Okay, yep, it's an hour and 10, but oh my God. Okay, yep. I'm going to put some links in the show notes and everybody can go watch Home Fires after this. 1944 Home Fires. Holy cow. That's really cool. I didn't know that before I finished this thing. I thought it just disappeared in the wind like the prison service wanted. But anyway, yeah, there's a story. Ivor Novello went to prison for misuse of petrol coupons. But I mean, everything that I read was saying that it was making a very, very specific point. I mean, that judge could have done something less. He could have given him a
Yeah.
huge fine. But no, sent him to prison. Very, very much in the same vein as Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
I did those two episodes, and Wilde, like Novello, was just as helpful in his own trial. I
Yeah.
mean, what was that? They asked him if he was really attracted to one boy, and he's like, more or less said he's kind of not my type without
Yeah.
saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's hard. This sounds like one of those cases where it's kind of hard to tell if it's a homophobia and maybe it's more complicated than just one thing or another. I remember when I was doing research on World War One poets, they had the whole white feather thing. They would hand out white feathers to men who were in civilian clothing at the tube to say, like you're a chicken. Everybody else is signing up, but you're a chicken. And so the whole white feather thing was a really big deal. So there's this patriotism. Well, that was World War One. Even with World War Two, there had to be a sense of, look, we were bombed in the Battle of Britain, and then we've been conserving gasoline while you're driving around in your Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
So there's probably some class issues there. People can be pretty vindictive when it comes to. I was just watching that HBO thing, The Jinx, and how one of his lawyers was saying, one of the things with notoriety that's a problem is that sometimes you are punished for your notoriety.
Right.
Or you're punished for your wealth. And so people can use the judicial system to do those things. And so that's really fascinating. So it's hard to say what it is. I mean, or it could just be downright homophobia. I mean, that could be just it.
Well, you're right. The rationing thing was pretty serious because so many things were rationed, like different types of groceries. You could only buy certain types of clothing or at certain times. So, yeah, I mean, everything was tight. We talk about economic problems today. It's like you don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can imagine somebody who spent 6 months trying to get enough petrol coupons to run his bakery delivery van is a little incensed when this handsome actor goes, but I need to go to my country home every week.
Yeah, exactly.
And they all know what he's doing there. So,
well, yeah, I mean, people resent people like, George Clooney, or some people do, especially, some right-wing folks who they don't like his activism. And so I'm sure that they would love a situation like that. Where they could attack him.
But I mean, the sentencing might have been a little harsh, but 1 month, you're fine. You might have to actually polish your own nails, wipe your own bottom.
Yeah.
But Ivor Novello. Any final thoughts on that?
I just think it's interesting that as you've been talking, I sort of looked up his Wikipedia on him, and it's pretty crazy how prolific he was.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say I'm like the litmus test of, whether someone is known or not. And it's always refreshing to me to learn new things. That's an awesome thing about my job, is I get to learn new things all the time. But the fact that, I didn't know him at all. I think he is relatively not well known.
Right. Well, like I said, the one article I found basically said he was the British composer of stage musicals until Andrew Lloyd Webber came along.
Wow.
Like everybody knew him, but then you have a character like Andrew Lloyd Webber come in and his prolific body of work, okay, so Yeah, there was somebody before that. Weber didn't just come out and go, "Hey, I know how to write musicals."
Exactly. A side note, I have a friend who actually you probably know Eric Unruh in
Yes, I do.
Casper College. He
Mhm.
calls Andrew Lloyd Webber Andrew Lloyd Wealthy.
Yep. I go back and forth with Weber personally. It's
Yeah.
just a lot of it's not my cup of tea. I did that whole episode on whether or not Cats was any good. Don't get me started on Phantom.
Oh God.
It's one of those
Yeah.
things. It's like you love it or you hate it, and I am
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
latter category.
Yeah. Me
Yeah,
too.
people,
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
but I see where
Yeah.
people do like it. It's just
Yes.
not my thing. You know what I mean? But yeah, Novello was the Weber of his time.
Wow.
Like incredibly wealthy. Everyone went to see him. And you know what? That was one thing that I was thinking of while I was researching this. You remember in like the early 2000s when Ricky Martin was just getting big, and La Vida Loca, and everybody's like,
Yeah.
my God, he's good looking. And then the question was like, well, who's he dating? And those in the know were like, hey, let's not ask this question. But everybody just wanted to just apply the screws a little bit more. They're like, we want to see what hot woman you land, because that's the way it goes, right? And when he be asked in interviews, they're like, so have you got a girlfriend? He's like, I just want to keep it about the music if they would. And nobody was having it.
Yeah.
And then when he finally came out as gay, I hate it that his star fell, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, we still know him. We still talk about Ricky Martin. People still listen to his music. He's still got his fan base, but he's not the Elvis Presley anymore.
No.
I thought that was so unfortunate. But in this time, the ladies are just like, I don't care who he's sleeping with. He is good looking.
Yeah.
I want to see that poster. So did Novello get what he had coming to him? I don't know. I'm not a trial magistrate, nor will I ever be, think Dionysus, but I do think that the guilty verdict was appropriate and that Novello did deserve some sort of consequence. On the one hand, the nation was at war, and he definitely didn't need to feel that he was any exception to that. On the other hand, if the trial magistrate was trying to make a statement to the homosexual community with Novello's sentence, I don't think he was as successful as he would have liked to be. I want to thank Doug Reitinger for his contributions to this episode. I'd be happy to have him on the show again. And as we march ever closer to episode 100, I'll sign off for now. This has been another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. I've been your host, Aaron Odom. Another episode will be in your ears in a couple weeks, and I'll see you at intermission.